Hello friends, in the previous session, we learned how to detect calcifications on a mammogram. In this session, we're going to go one step ahead and I'll be talking about all those features which help us in identification of suspicious calcifications which have a risk for harboring malignancy. Now, this is going to be an interactive session. We're going to have a look at the number of cases, and by looking at those cases, we'll try to identify and come up with the suspicious features for the calcification. So let's have a look at our first image, our first mammogram. Now, this mammogram we have had a look before also. This is the craniocaudal view. I hope everybody of you is going to agree with me. And this is the right breast and this is the left breast. It's all labeled. Now, do we see any calcifications on the mammogram? Do you see any calcifications on these? Yes, I can see multiple linear calcifications all throughout the breast parenchyma. I think that's for sure. Looking at the mediolateral oblique view, in the mediolateral oblique view again, we're seeing a number of calcifications which are located within the breast parenchyma. If you see even carefully, you'll be able to identify some other calcifications which are in form of a line. Let me just magnify it so you can see that there are discontinuous calcifications which are looking just like tram track in the breast parenchyma on either side. You can see them on both sides. Right now, let's not talk about these calcifications because these are perfectly benign calcifications. We'll be talking later on. Let's focus on these calcifications here. So when I magnify this image, in this magnified image, I hope all of you can see that these calcifications are having a linear appearance. They are linear calcifications. Now, if I ask you without any knowledge of mammogram, without even any knowledge of suspicious calcifications, do you think that these type of calcifications can harbor some form of malignancy? Look at that once again. This is the craniocaudal view. Again, if I magnify it, you can see all those calcifications seen so beautifully. And then we have a look at the mediolateral oblique view, which is also showing us the similar features here. So I hope that majority of you will say that, sir, because this is a bilateral disease, almost a symmetrical disease, and not only bilateral, it is actually involving almost entire breast parenchyma. It's involving a large part of the breast parenchyma, and I don't see any identifiable mass within it. So looking at all those features, this is not a suspicious calcification. This is unlikely to be malignant. Now, I would want you to go back. Just think about what is the important characteristic of this calcification which helped you make a diagnosis of it being non-malignant or non-suspicious. The most important characteristic is its distribution, because malignancies are going to be focal. You don't expect malignancies to be diffusely symmetrical in both the breast parenchyma and scattered throughout the breast parenchyma. That is going to be a focal mass. So if you see a calcification which is bilaterally distributed in a random fashion, it is very unlikely to be malignant. Our first lesson. Now, let's have a look at another case. Now, this is a mediolateral oblique view. I hope everybody of you is going to identify it. This is the right breast. This is the left breast. Now, first question, are there calcifications? So we've already learned this. We've already looked at so many cases. I hope everybody of you is going to tell me that, yes, sir, I can see a lot of calcifications in this area. But if I ask you, what is the distribution of the calcification looking like? Does it look like bilateral symmetric disease? No, not at all. The right breast is not showing any calcifications. There are no calcifications in the right breast. Now, if there is a disease which is unilateral and it is associated with calcifications, yes, this is a reason for concern. It could be harboring some form of a malignancy. Now, let's talk about the distribution, because right now we're talking about the distribution of calcifications. If I ask you what type of distribution is this calcification showing, so you would say, sir, this calcification is present here, 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 here. So it is present more in a segmental distribution. Why I'm saying a segment? Because if you review your anatomy of the breast, we know that the breast is composed of multiple lactiferous ducts, and these lactiferous ducts converge in the region of the nipple. One more suspicious thing is this lesion, this particular lesion that I see in the breast. So I do have a lesion in the breast, and on top of that lesion, I'm now looking at calcifications which are unilateral, number one, and they look like as if they are extending in a ductal fashion. I can call it a segmental fashion. So this is a segmental calcification. I hope I can use the word segmental for it, because it is involving one segment of the breast parenchyma, and it is actually conforming to the distribution of the ducts, because it is typically taking the shape of the ducts. So this to me looks like a suspicious calcification. Fine. Now let's have a look at the same case, but from the craniocaudal view. This is the right breast. This is the left breast. Fine. Let me use some bright color so that you see more beautifully. What do we see? Again, I can see the mass lesion very well here. The mass lesion is present. I don't know whether it's benign or malignant because right now I'm talking only about calcifications. But when I look at these calcifications are definitely having a ductal distribution. Now just use your brains. If there is a malignancy, if there is a malignancy in the breast parenchyma and this malignancy is going through the ducts, so obviously it would cause calcifications in a ductal fashion. Do you expect any benign disease to have this type of a segmental distribution? Very unlikely. What type of benign disease do we know? We know about fibrocystic diseases, we know about fibroadenosis, we know about fibroadenomas, but these are all focal lesions. They do not have a segmental or a ductal distribution. There are diseases which are benign, which can involve ducts, like if you have some form of a ductal ataxia, but that is expected to have a more widespread distribution. So this type of distribution to me looks suspicious. I hope everybody of you will agree with me. Even if there was no mass here, I would still say that this distribution is suspicious. Have a look at these calcifications. Now, it's typically seen that these calcifications are now part of the one disease spectrum. Why? Because they're actually conforming to the anatomical shape of the duct. So segmental type of a calcification doesn't look good to me. It looks suspicious to me. Now, let's have a look at another calcification. What do we see here? Now, here I provided you with the craniocaudal and the mediolateral oblique view of one breast, because I'll tell you that this is basically a unilateral disease. We've already talked about that. If the disease is unilateral only, then we have to be concerned about. So this is a unilateral disease. And the next question that I need to answer is there a need for concern? I still don't know anything about calcifications. Don't look at the shape of these calcifications. Just look at the distribution, because right now we'll be talking about the distribution. We've talked about two distribution: bilateral symmetrical distribution or bilateral asymmetric distribution, which you can call as diffuse distribution. The second one was a segmental distribution. Now this type of distribution here, what we're seeing is a number of calcifications, but they're distributed over a wider area. Do they look like ductal in distribution? No, not at all. I mean, some calcifications are here, some are here, some are here. They are more randomly distributed. Look at this medial lateral oblique view. No, they're not conforming to a duct. A duct would be something like this, okay, which is actually converging towards the nipple. Here, I don't see that sort of pattern. This type of calcification to me does not look suspicious, because if there is a malignancy, if there is a mass, it is going to involve a small segment of the breast parenchyma, and even if it goes through the ducts, then it would involve a segment of the duct. But here, these calcifications are present here in random pattern of distribution. So these type of calcifications, which are randomly distributed inside the breast parenchyma, and they are distributed over a large area. In this case, I can say it is distributed over an area of more than 2 centimeters in the breast parenchyma. This is unlikely to be suspicious calcification. Now, this type of distribution has also been given a name, regional, because we need to give a name to everything. We gave a name to this also. When you have calcifications which are distributed over an area, over a large area of the breast parenchyma, not the entire breast parenchyma, but definitely more than 2 centimeters. So these are called as regional calcifications. Now, this is just a magnified view. Look at the nature of these calcifications, which we'll be discussing later on. This calcification doesn't look like a malignant calcification to me anyhow. When the morphology we'll be talking about later on, but the distribution wise, it is definitely a benign calcification. Now let's have a look at this type of a calcification. What do you think it is? Let me just magnify it a bit. This is the mediolateral oblique, and this is the craniocaudal view. What do you think is the pattern of distribution? Just depending upon the pattern, I want you to answer whether this is a suspicious looking calcification or this is a benign looking calcification. So the major concern that I have in this case is this is having a very focal distribution. I mean, a lot of calcifications are concentrated at a very small area. No matter whether you look at the mediolateral view, no matter whether you look at the craniocaudal view, in both the views, the calcifications are closely clustered. And these calcifications are also looking as if they are conforming to the ductal pattern. Now, these type of calcifications, where you have a number of calcifications which are clustered over a very small area, as you can see here, are called as grouped because they look as if they're forming a group, or conventionally called as clustered calcifications. So there must be some objective criteria for it. There must be some subjective criteria for it. So the criteria is, if you find 5 calcifications which are grouped within 1 centimeter of an area, then they're called as grouped calcifications or clustered calcifications. Now, let's forget about the definitions. Have a look at this particular case. I've just magnified it for you, and tell me whether these type of calcifications look suspicious to you or not. To me, they definitely look very, very suspicious, because this distribution pattern is, number one, a ductal pattern. Number two, it is also having a number of calcifications at a small place, clustering. Where do you expect malignancy to occur? You expect malignancy to occur in a focal area of the breast parenchyma, and calcifications are being produced through the malignant process. So if you have a number of calcifications which are located in a very small clustered area, it is more likely to be some form of a malignant pathology. So looking at this particular case, looking at the calcification distribution, I can say that this type of distribution is definitely not looking normal to me. So if we have a diffuse or a scattered process, we've already seen that it's likely to be benign. If we have a regional distribution, again, which is non-ductal, it's also likely to be benign. So what is of concern? Intermediate or malignant concern? The two important patterns that we talked about, either a clustered pattern where we have more than 5 in almost 1 centimeter area, where we have a segmental pattern where we have involvement of the ducts plus the branches of the lobe, and when we have a linear pattern somewhat like this, where we see that there is a linear distribution which is conforming to the duct. We'll also be talking about the linear pattern in great detail when we're talking about ductal calcifications, but for now, one thing which is for sure is any calcification which goes through the ducts in the shape of the ducts and conforming to the morphology or the contour of the ducts is likely to be malignant. This is what we have learned so far. Now, this is basically a diagrammatic representation of one or more the same thing. The diffuse process, a benign process. Let me use a different color for it. So this is likely a benign distribution. Regional, again a benign distribution. When we have a grouped calcification, it is always a suspicious. When we have a ductal pattern, as you can see here, a linear pattern, it is always a suspicious. And when we have multiple ducts involved, thus forming this type of a pattern, which is not a ductal pattern, but it is a segmental pattern, it is always suspicious. So this is the segmental pattern. This is also called as the linear pattern or the ductal pattern, which is again suspicious for malignancy. Now that we've talked about the distribution patterns of calcification, now let's try to dig deep and try to understand why this ductal pattern of calcification is a harbinger for malignancy. For this, I want you to have a look at this particular case, which we have already seen. Here we are finding more of a segmental pattern of distribution, because we can see involvement of more than one duct. Fine. If I just magnify it, I get this type of a picture where I can see that these are ducts, and through the ducts I can see the calcification growing along. Fine. I hope this is something that everybody of you is going to recognize. We've already talked about it. This is another example. What we're seeing here, we can see there are calcifications. Let me magnify it. You can see these linear calcifications, and these linear calcifications are actually extending along the pattern of the duct. Look at it, typically looking like a linear distribution, and this linear distribution is also showing some branching. Now just use your brains, use your imagination, and think about why this type of a distribution looks like malignant distribution. Before that, I want you to have a look at another case. Now this case, what we are seeing here, we can again see a number of calcifications in this area, and when we magnify it, these calcifications are much better seen. Now these type of calcifications which we see here, they are more rounded, as you can see. Some of them are linear also, but majority of them being rounded. Now these are distributed randomly. They're not conforming to the shape of the duct, so these are not looking like malignant calcifications to me. But when we look at the distribution patterns and the shape of the calcifications, we've just concluded that if the pattern is ductal, it is more likely to be malignancy. Why? Let's try to understand the pattern of malignancy. Why do calcifications occur in malignancy? In malignancy, calcifications occur because there is increasing cell production, increasing cell metabolism, and increasing cell death. That is what happens in cancer. So these dead cells get sequestered in the only area which provides the outlet or the output to the breast secretions. So after a period of time, when these dead cells have found their way into these ducts here, the linear ducts here, they will eventually calcify. and they form casts. And these calcified casts are something that we can visualize on a mammogram. And this is the reason why, if you see these casts in a linear pattern distribution, it means that it's basically the cancer cells which have sequestered inside the ductal channels, resulting in clogging of these ductal channels by calcifications, and this ductal pattern represents malignancy. On the other hand, when we talk about breast parenchyma, we also talk about these structures which are nothing but the acini. Now, if there is a disease which is more widespread, which results in inflammation of these acini, or any pathology which is actually affecting these acini, that is the terminal units, this will also result in formation of calcifications here. But the pattern of calcification will conform to the shape of these acini, just like this, just like this, just like this. So you'll have more rounded or punctate pattern of calcification as we saw in this particular case. It means if there is a disease which is affecting the acini, that would be likely producing punctate pattern of calcifications. And if there is a disease which is filling in the ductal channels, it will produce a more linear pattern of calcifications, a ductal pattern of calcifications. And we have already learned that it is basically the malignancy which results in sequestration of the dead cells in form of calcium in the ductal channels. On the other hand, those diseases which are more benign, like fibrocystic diseases like sclerosing adenosis. Now, these are those diseases which are benign diseases, widespread diseases which are affecting a large part of the breast parenchyma. They are infecting predominantly this part. Why? Because this is the area where the milk gets produced. So these benign diseases will result in small punctate calcifications which have a more lobular pattern, more diffuse pattern, because you can see even in one duct we have a number of acini which are connected. So the diseases which affect the acini, they're more likely to be widespread, bilateral symmetrical, and they produce round or punctate calcifications which are definitely not suspicious.